Welcome. Find a comfortable position, let your body settle, and allow your breathing to slow. Tonight we're going to spend some time with one of the most compelling and controversial characters in the history of prestige television, and with a question that has fascinated philosophers and storytellers for centuries. Are people born the way they are, or are they shaped by what happens to them? Nature versus nurture. We are going to explore that question tonight through the story of one woman. A woman who has been called a monster, a mother, a survivor, a tyrant, and a tragic figure, sometimes all in the same breath. Her name is Cersei Lannister. She's not a character who invites simple judgment. She lived her whole life at the intersection of power and powerlessness, born into one of the wealthiest families in the world, and yet denied the thing she wanted most, denied a genuine education in statecraft, denied the freedom to choose her own husband, denied the title of heir to her own house, simply because of her gender, and then, armed with beauty, intelligence, cruelty, and an almost bottomless capacity for love and hatred in equal measure, she climbed anyway. Cersei Lannister is, in many ways, a perfect case study. The show gives us 8 seasons to watch her. We see her as a daughter, a wife, a queen, a mother, a prisoner, and finally a ruler in her own right. We see her make choices that horrify us, and we sometimes understand exactly why she made them. We watch her love her children so fiercely that the love becomes something dark. We watch her use the systems of power around her in the only ways those systems would allow a woman to use them. So let us begin at the beginning and work our way through her story, season by season, asking that question all the way through. Was Cersei Lannister born a villain, or was she made into one? When we first meet Cersei, she's travelling north with her husband, King Robert Baratheon, to visit their old friend Eddard Stark in Winterfell. She's already a queen, she's been one for 17 years, and in those opening episodes she carries herself the way someone carries armour, beautifully fitted, perfectly polished, and absolutely necessary. The first thing we learn about Cersei is that her marriage is a ruin. Robert is loud, drunk, and still in love with a dead woman, Lyanna Stark, Ned's sister, who was promised to Robert before she died. Cersei has spent nearly 2 decades married to a man who wished she were someone else. She has borne him 3 children. She has sat beside him on the Iron Throne. And she is, in every way that the world would recognise, completely invisible to him. There is a scene early in the first season where Cersei and Robert talk about his long-lost love. Being in Winterfell has brought back old memories for him, and they have a conversation, rare, honest, almost tender in its bleakness, where they both acknowledge that their marriage has always been nothing. Robert asks if they were ever happy, even for a moment. Cersei says yes, then admits she's lying. It is one of the few moments in the entire series where both characters drop their armour at the same time, and what is underneath is just 2 people who are profoundly lonely. This matters for our purposes because loneliness sustained over decades changes people. It calcifies into something harder. It teaches you not to look for warmth in other people, and to find it wherever you can. And so we learn the other great secret of Cersei's life. She's in love with her twin brother Jamie. This is the relationship that defines her more than any other, more than her marriage, more even than her children in certain respects. Jamie is the person who has known her longest, loved her most completely, and reflected back to her the version of herself she most wants to be. When Cersei looks at Jamie, she sees her equal. She sees the man she could have been, though she was born a woman, a gender that would never make her truly equal. That is a line she actually speaks in the show, that Jamie is everything she was supposed to be, brave, free, trained to fight, able to ride into battle and take what he wanted from the world. And she was none of those things, because she was a woman, and in this world that meant being a gift to be given away. Let us think about what childhood must have looked like for Cersei Lannister. She grew up in Casterly Rock, the great Lannister seat, a fortress carved into the side of a cliff, enormous and ancient and filled with gold. The Lannisters were the wealthiest family in the 7 Kingdoms. They wanted for nothing in material terms. And yet the world Cersei grew up in was structured in ways that made certain things very clear, very early. Her father, Tywin Lannister, was one of the most formidable political figures in the history of Westeros. He had served as Hand of the King. He had effectively run the realm for 20 years during the reign of the Mad King Aerys. He was brilliant, cold, methodical, and profoundly concerned with the legacy and reputation of House Lannister. His children were part of that legacy. Jamie, his eldest son, was trained to fight from a young age. He had tutors, masters at arms, all the trappings of a noble warrior's education. He was destined for the King's Guard, which was the highest honour available to a knight. He was allowed to move through the world as a person of consequence and agency. Cersei, his eldest daughter, was trained to be beautiful, well-mannered, and marriageable. She was taught to run a household, to manage servants, to comport herself with dignity in court. She was not taught to fight. She was not taught to rule. Not in any meaningful sense. She was taught to be useful to her father's plans by being the kind of daughter who could be exchanged for political advantage. She understood this. She was too intelligent not to understand it. And she both accepted and never accepted it. Accepted it in the sense that she learned to work within the structures available to her, and never accepted it in the sense that she spent her entire life seething at the constraints and looking for ways around them. The prophecy of Maggie the Frog is worth introducing here. In the show, we see it in a flashback at the very beginning of Season 5. Young Cersei, impetuous and imperious even as a girl, seeks out a witch in the woods near Casterly Rock. She demands her fortune. The witch tells her she'll be queen, but not for long, that she will have 3 children, and all 3 will die before her, that a younger, more beautiful queen will come and take everything from her. Cersei has carried this prophecy her entire adult life. And here is the crucial question about prophecy in a life like hers. Does knowing the prophecy cause her to act in ways that make it come true? Does the fear of being replaced drive her to destroy people who might be rivals, in ways that ultimately make her more enemies and accelerate her downfall? Does the certainty that her children will die make her love them with a ferocity that smothers them? There is a philosophical concept sometimes called the self-fulfilling prophecy, the idea that believing something will happen changes your behaviour in ways that make it more likely to happen. It is possible that Cersei's prophecy functions this way, that the foreknowledge does not just predict her fate, but participates in creating it. Now here is where nature and nurture begin to intertwine in interesting ways, because there are 2 ways to read the Cersei-Jamie relationship. One reading is that Cersei had narcissistic tendencies, and Jamie was the closest reflection of herself. She saw him as an extension of herself for so much of her life. He was the only one that knew what it was like to be a Lannister with Tywin as a father. Of course Tyrion knew too, but she never saw him as an equal, not like Jamie. The other reading is that this relationship is the product of her circumstances, that a woman who was denied love in her marriage, denied power in her family, and denied freedom in her role as a daughter to be sold, naturally found the only person who had always truly seen her, who had been beside her from before birth, and clung to him with everything she had. That the relationship is not evidence of something monstrous in her nature, but of something deeply human responding to a deeply deprived environment. Both things can be true at once. That is often the most honest answer when we ask these questions about real people, and it is certainly the most honest answer when we ask them about Cersei. The other defining action of Season 1, of course, is what happens to Bran Stark. A young boy climbs a tower. He looks through a window. He sees something he was not supposed to see. Cersei and Jamie together, and Jamie pushes him. Bran falls. He does not die, but he is paralysed. Cersei did not push Bran. Jamie did, in a split second of panic. But Cersei is complicit. She is the reason for the secret. She is the reason a child had to be silenced. And this is the first of many moments in the series where Cersei's survival requires harm to innocence. She does not enjoy it. That is worth saying. Cersei is not, in Season 1, someone who takes pleasure in cruelty for its own sake. She is someone who has decided, perhaps decided long ago, that survival and protection of her children comes before everything else, before morality, before other people's lives. The harm she causes is instrumental harm, not sadistic harm, which does not make it less harmful, but it does make it different, at least from the later seasons. By the end of the first season, Robert is dead, helped along by a hunting accident that Cersei quietly facilitated. Ned Stark has uncovered the secret of her children's parentage, and rather than let him expose it, she has used her position to have him arrested and eventually executed. She has her son, Joffrey, on the throne, and she is, for the first time, the most powerful woman in Westeros. Take a breath. Let the weight of your body sink into wherever you are resting. We are only at the beginning. Season 2 arrives with the War of the Five Kings at its height, and Cersei in an unusual position. Her son is king, but Joffrey is a child, and a sadistic one, and despite all her efforts she cannot fully control him. Her father Tywin arrives and takes over as Hand of the King, further sidelining her. She is the Queen Regent in name. In practice, she is surrounded by men who dismiss her at every turn. This season gives us some of the most revealing Cersei moments in the entire series, precisely because the pressure is so high and the mask slips more than once. There is a conversation she has with Tyrion, her younger brother, whom she has despised since birth, because she blamed him, irrationally and completely, for their mother's death in childbirth. In this conversation, she is drunk and afraid, and for a few minutes she speaks openly about what it has been like to be her. She talks about what it meant to grow up knowing she would be married off, to watch Jamie be trained as a knight while she sat in lessons about how to be a good wife. She speaks it plainly. She learned that the only weapon available to her was her beauty, and she used it, because it was all she had. It is worth pausing on the relationship between Cersei and Tyrion, because it is one of the most complicated in the show, and because it illuminates something important about how cruelty can be learned rather than inherent. Tyrion was born a dwarf, which in Westeros carried enormous stigma. His mother Joanna died in childbirth, delivering him. Tywin never forgave Tyrion for this, irrationally but completely, and made his contempt for his younger son clear throughout their lives. Cersei, growing up watching her father's treatment of Tyrion, absorbed the message. She also perhaps transferred some of her own grief and fear about her mother's death onto her brother. If Tyrion had not been born, their mother would be alive, so went the child's logic. The hatred Cersei bears for Tyrion is not purely calculated. It has a genuine emotional quality that precedes any of the specific things he has done to her. It is a childhood hatred, baked in before she had the tools to examine it. This is one of the clearest examples in the show of how a person can carry damage from their earliest environment, can have their hatreds and fears shaped before they have any conscious say in the matter, and then spend a lifetime acting out of those formative injuries. Tyrion, for his part, oscillates between wanting his sister's love and accepting that it will never come. The tragedy of their dynamic is that if either of them had been slightly different people, in a slightly different family, they might have been allies. They are both intelligent. They are both survivors. They understand each other in the dark and bitter way of people who share a history of the same household, but the damage ran too deep, too early. From a nurture perspective, this season does a great deal to contextualize how Cersei came to be who she is. The Lannister household was one of wealth and power and very specific expectations. Tywin Lannister loved his children in the way powerful men sometimes love their children, as extensions of himself, as pieces in a game, as investments to be deployed correctly. He was not warm. He was not in any meaningful way emotionally available. What he offered his children was high standards, intense pressure, and the knowledge that the family name was the most important thing in the world. Cersei internalized all of this. She became Tywin's daughter in a way that even Tywin could not entirely contain. She thought politically. She thought dynastically. She understood the game. But she was a woman, and no matter how capable she was, the structures around her would not let her play it the way she wanted to. Her relationship with her children, which becomes central in this season, is also worth examining. She loves Joffrey with a completeness that blinds her to who he actually is. She cannot see his cruelty, or more precisely she can see it, but she cannot accept that it is real. because to accept it would be to accept something catastrophic about her own creation. The Battle of Blackwater at the end of Season 2 shows Cersei at her most stripped down. Stannis Baratheon is attacking King's Landing by sea, and for a while it looks like he might win. Cersei, believing the city is about to fall, sits in the throne room with a group of highborn women and children. She prepares poison for Tommen. If the city falls, she will not let her youngest son be taken prisoner or killed by someone else's hand. She will do it herself. It is a horrifying moment. It is also in its way a moment of terrible love. The logic of it, if I cannot protect you, I will choose how you leave, is the logic of a person who has lost faith in the world's ability to be kind and decided to become the last line of control herself. When Tywin arrives and the city is saved, she's still sitting there, holding her son, the poison untouched. The relief on her face is complete, and then it closes over again. Let your breathing stay slow and easy. There is no rush, just let the story move through you. Season 3 is a quieter season for Cersei in terms of dramatic action, but a revealing one in terms of character. The war continues, the political machinations of King's Landing continue, and Cersei is pulled between different forces, her father's authority, her son's increasingly erratic behaviour, and the arrivals and departures of people who matter to her. And chief among those departures is Jamie. He has been captured by Robb Stark's forces and is being held prisoner somewhere out in the war. For most people, learning that someone they love is a captive in a war would produce straightforward fear. For Cersei, it is more complicated than that. She is afraid, yes. Jamie is the person she loves most in the world, the one constant she has always been able to return to. But fear in Cersei rarely arrives alone. It arrives with anger attached to it. And underneath the anger, if you look closely enough, is something that resembles blame. He left. He rode out into a war and he got himself captured, and now she is here, alone, without her father's respect, without her husband, without the one person who has always made her feel less isolated. He did this. That is the logic her mind reaches for, even when she knows it is not fair. This is one of the clearest expressions of Cersei's narcissistic tendencies in the entire series. She's capable of genuine love. We have established that, and it is true. But her love has always had a possessive quality to it. The people she loves exist in some part of her mind to be present for her. When they are not, when they leave or are taken or die, her first instinct is not only grief, it is a kind of wounded outrage. How could you do this to me? A significant thread this season is also the question of marriage. Tywin informs Cersei that she is to be married again, this time to Loras Tyrell, the Knight of Flowers, brother to Margaery, who is being groomed to marry Joffrey. Cersei is appalled. She has been a queen. She has been free of her marriage as effectively, if not officially, since Robert's death. The idea of being placed back into a role of subservience, of being a wife again, is genuinely unbearable to her. When she confronts her father about it, Tywin is characteristically unmovable. The match is politically useful. Her feelings about it are not relevant. He tells her directly that her failure to use her position and beauty to create alliances for the family over the past 17 years has been a disappointment. He uses the word wasted. That her position as queen was wasted because she could not manage her husband. It is one of the most painful exchanges in the series, and one of the most illuminating, because what Tywin says is both incredibly cruel and, from within his own worldview, completely sincere. He genuinely does not understand that the problem was not Cersei's failure. The problem was that the position of wife and queen in this world does not actually grant the kind of power that would allow a person to do what he is describing. He gave her an impossible task and blames her for not completing it. This is the engine of Cersei's psychology laid bare. She grew up in a system that valued her only for specific things: her beauty, her name, her ability to make a good match, and then blamed her when those things were not enough. She learned to want power in a world that denied it to her structurally, and then was criticized for not being powerful enough. No wonder she became ruthless. No wonder she learned to find power wherever she could find it, by whatever means were available. The question is not why Cersei is the way she is. The question, when you look at the conditions of her life, is how she could have been anything else. At the same time, and this is where nurture alone cannot fully explain her, other characters in the show, face similarly constrained circumstances and respond differently. Marjorie Tyrell navigates the same world of arranged marriages and male power with charm, strategy, and a kind of genuine warmth. Sansa Stark endures extraordinary suffering and comes out of it, with her humanity largely intact. These women are not Cersei, which suggests that the conditions of Cersei's life do not entirely account for who she is. There is something in her, some particular arrangement of traits, that shaped how she responded to those conditions. Sansa is worth dwelling on for a moment, because her story runs parallel to Cersei's in ways the show does not always make explicit. She arrives in King's Landing in Season 1 as a girl who wants exactly what Cersei once wanted: to be a queen, to be loved, to live inside the fairy tale that the world told her was available to her if she was good enough and beautiful enough and obedient enough. She is, in a sense, a younger version of the dream Cersei once had before the world taught her what dreams were worth. And then the world teaches Sansa the same lesson, differently and faster, and with a brutality that is almost relentless. She watches Ned Stark executed in front of a crowd. She's held prisoner in a court that uses her as a pawn. She's beaten on Joffrey's orders. She's married off without her consent. She endures things that would have justified almost any response: rage, vengeance, a decision to become something hard and cold and unreachable. She does not. She bends and she breaks and she learns and she endures. And what she builds out of all of that suffering is not armour in the way Cersei built armour, not a coldness, not a willingness to harm others as a first resort, but something more like wisdom, a deep understanding of people, of power, of how the world actually works underneath its pretty surface. She becomes formidable, but she becomes formidable without losing herself entirely. Cersei watches Sansa during the seasons they share in King's Landing, and her feelings toward the girl are, as with most things for Cersei, complicated. There is contempt sometimes. Sansa's naivety irritates her. She has no patience for someone who has not yet learned what the world is. But there is also, underneath that, something closer to recognition. She sees in Sansa the girl she herself once was, hopeful, romantic, unguarded. And the recognition is not comfortable. It is never comfortable to look at what you used to be. There is even, in certain moments, something that functions almost like protectiveness. Not enough to actually protect her. Not enough to intervene when Joffrey is cruel, or to refuse Tywin's arrangement of the marriage to Tyrion. But enough to occasionally offer Sansa a piece of honest advice. To warn her, in her oblique way, about what this world does to women who are not careful. It is the closest Cersei comes, in these seasons, to genuine mentorship, and even that is compromised because the advice is always delivered in a way that serves Cersei's own interests as much as Sansa's. The contrast between them is the sharpest argument the show makes for the nature side of the debate, because if circumstances alone produced Cersei, if the arranged marriage and the powerlessness and the grief were sufficient to explain who she became, then Sansa, subjected to many of the same forces, should have become something similar. She does not, which means either that Sansa is stronger than Cersei in some fundamental way, or that Cersei was always going to respond to the world the way she did, regardless of what the world did to her. Or, most likely, that both women brought something of their own to their circumstances, and those somethings were simply different. Not better or worse, different. And the circumstances drew different things out of each of them. What we can say is that the conditions made the worst of Cersei's traits more likely to dominate. That is perhaps the most honest version of the nature-nurture answer. The environment does not create the person, but it selects which parts of the person grow. What we can say is that the conditions made the worst of those traits more likely to dominate. That is perhaps the most honest version of the nature-nurture answer. The environment does not create the person, but it selects which parts of the person grow. This season also gives us the Red Wedding, which Cersei watches unfold with complicated satisfaction. The Starks, who have been her enemies, are being decimated. She does not participate, but she does not mourn. This is a moment where her capacity for something approaching satisfaction at others' suffering becomes more visible. It is not pleasure exactly. It is closer to relief, the absence of a threat, the score settling itself. Season 4 begins at a wedding and ends with a murder, and in between it takes almost everything from Cersei one piece at a time. But before we get to what is taken from her, it is worth spending some time on what is threatening her at the start of this season. Because the arrival of Margaery Tyrell into Cersei's world is not just a political inconvenience, it is something that gets under her skin in a way that very few things do. And to understand why, we have to understand what Margaery represents to her. Margaery is everything Cersei was trained to be, and does it better. She's beautiful, composed, politically shrewd, and effortlessly charming in public. She knows how to work a crowd, how to make common people love her, how to sit beside a king and make him feel like the decision was always his. These are skills Cersei has spent decades cultivating, often at great personal cost. And Margaery deploys them with an ease and a warmth that Cersei has never quite been able to manufacture. What makes it worse is that Cersei cannot entirely dismiss her. Margaery is not a fool. She's not simply a pretty face being moved around a board by her family. She's genuinely intelligent, genuinely strategic, and, perhaps most infuriatingly, genuinely kind in a way that Cersei has long since stopped being able to access. Cersei can see all of this clearly, and it enrages her. There is also something more personal underneath the political rivalry. Margaery is young. She's the younger, more beautiful queen that the prophecy warned Cersei about. Cersei has known this was coming her entire adult life, has dreaded it, has looked for it in every woman who came close to the throne, and here she is, smiling, winning over Joffrey, winning over the small folk, winning over Tommen, winning it seems, without even trying very hard. Cersei watches Margaery with Joffrey and feels something complicated that she would never name aloud. It is partly the territorial instinct of a mother who does not trust anyone with her child. It is partly the political alarm of a queen who can see her influence being quietly redirected. But it is also, underneath all of that, something closer to recognition. She sees in Margaery a version of the woman she might have been, charming rather than cold, loved rather than feared, and the recognition is not comfortable. Because there are those who would say Cersei was always this way, that the coldness was always in her, waiting. And there are those who would say the warmth got burned out of her slowly over years by a marriage that did not want it and a court that could not be trusted with it. Margaery still has it, and whether that is because Margaery is genuinely a warmer person, or simply because she has not yet been through what Cersei has been through, we cannot say for certain, but the effect on Cersei is the same either way. It is a reminder of something, lost, or perhaps never fully possessed, and Cersei does not respond well to either. So the tension between them is never simply about power, though it is always also about power. It is about two women who both understand the game completely, who can see each other seeing them, and who cannot afford to let the other one win. Margaery smiles at Cersei, and the smile is genuine, and the smile is also a threat. Cersei smiles back, and means every bit of the threat and none of the warmth. They both know exactly what is happening. Neither of them says so. It is, in its way, the most honest relationship Cersei has with anyone this season, because at least with Margaery she knows where she stands. The Purple Wedding, Joffrey's wedding to Margaery Tyrell, ends with Joffrey dying. He is poisoned at his own feast in front of hundreds of guests, and he dies in Cersei's arms. And here is something the show does that is genuinely remarkable. It makes us grieve with her. Joffrey has been one of the cruelest characters in the series. He has caused enormous suffering. He ordered Ned Stark's execution. He tormented Sansa for seasons. He is not a sympathetic character. And yet, watching Cersei hold him as he dies, watching the terror and helplessness on her face, there is nothing cold about it. There is only a mother losing a child. Whatever he was hers, and she loved him completely. This is part of what makes Cersei so enduring as a character. Her love, for Jamie, for her children, is real. It is not performed, it is not strategic. It is the most genuine thing about her, and it is the thing that keeps making her human, even when everything else she does pushes her towards something less than human. Something worth considering about Cersei's grief for Joffrey is what it reveals about the nature of parental love and moral blindness. She loved Joffrey fully, without reservation. He was cruel, sadistic, and ultimately a terrible king. She must have known this on some level, and yet her love did not dim. This is not an unusual phenomenon in human psychology. Parents are capable of loving children who do terrible things, children who are objectively harmful, children who by any reasonable moral accounting should be condemned. The love is not contingent on the child's goodness. It is rooted in something prior to moral assessment, in the bond of creation, the years of care, the child's face as it was when it was small and needed you. What Cersei did with that love, however, how she protected Joffrey, covered for him, refused to hold him accountable, cleared paths for him, that has consequences beyond her own psychology, because her unconditional love for Joffrey made it easier for him to become who he was. Children who are never corrected, never disciplined, never told that their cruelty is wrong, tend to have those tendencies amplified rather than constrained. Cersei's love was real, but it was also enabling. The show does not let us dismiss her love as simply monstrous. It also does not let us dismiss its effects. Both things are allowed to be true simultaneously. And this is, again, one of the core truths about the nature-nurture debate. Our environments shape not just us, but the people we are responsible for. In the immediate aftermath of Joffrey's death, Cersei accuses Tyrion of the murder. This is partly political. Tyrion is a convenient target, and she has always blamed him for things, always looked for ways to be rid of him. But it is also grief finding a target. When we are in pain, we often reach for certainty, even false certainty. Cersei needs someone to have done this, someone she can punish. Tyrion is available, so Tyrion it is. But to understand why Tyrion specifically, why it is always Tyrion, why her hatred for him runs so much deeper and hotter than her hatred for anyone else, we have to go back further than this moment. We have to go back to the way Cersei has always understood her own story. Cersei and Jamie grew up as a unit, twins, inseparable, mirrors of each other, and from very early on Cersei understood the world as something that existed outside of that unit. There was her and Jamie, and then there was everything else. The court, the politics, the arranged marriages, the endless expectations. All of it was the world, pressing in. And the world was not kind. The world was something to be navigated, managed, survived. But as long as she had Jamie, she was never entirely alone inside it. Tyrion, in Cersei's mind, was never part of that inner circle. He was never her and Jamie. He was always the world. He was, in fact, the very first thing the world ever took from her, because his birth took their mother. Before Cersei had any conscious understanding of politics or power, or what it meant to be a Lannister woman, she had already lost something to Tyrion. Her mother died bringing him into the world, and however irrational it is to blame a newborn for that, and it is irrational completely, the emotional logic lodged itself in her before she had the tools to examine it. Tyrion arrived, and something was taken. That equation never left her. So when Joffrey dies, and Cersei is standing over the body of her firstborn son, the person her mind reaches for is not random. It is the person who has always represented loss to her, the person who has always been, in the deepest and least rational part of her, the enemy within the gates. Tyrion's trial unfolds across several episodes, and it is one of the most charged sequences in the series. Cersei works behind the scenes, pressuring witnesses, shaping testimony, making sure the outcome is the one she wants. She is not passive in this. She is deliberate. She wants her brother dead, and she uses every tool available to her to make that happen. And then Tyrion demands a trial by combat. He loses. He is condemned to die. Everything Cersei has worked toward is in place. And then Jamie lets him out of his cell. This is the moment that changes everything between Cersei and Jamie, and it is worth sitting with what it actually means to her. Because Jamie freeing Tyrion is not just a political act, or a brotherly one. In Cersei's framework, in the worldview she has built her entire life around, it is a fundamental betrayal of the most sacred thing she believed in. She and Jamie against the world. That was the pact. That was the foundation. And Tyrion was the world. Tyrion was the enemy, and Jamie chose him. It does not matter to Cersei that Jamie may have had his own reasons, that he may have doubted Tyrion's guilt, that he may have acted out of conscience or out of love for his brother, or out of some growing moral sense that the trial was a farce. None of that registers in the way she experiences it. What she experiences is simple and devastating. When it came to the moment of choosing, Jamie chose wrong. Jamie chose the world over her. She will not forget this. She is not built for forgetting. And then Tyrion, before he leaves, goes to their father's chambers. What happens next is something Cersei will carry for the rest of her life. He finds Tywin, the great Tywin Lannister, the most powerful man in Westeros, sitting in his most undignified and human moment, and he shoots him dead with a crossbow. For Cersei, this is the second catastrophic loss of the season. Joffrey and Tywin both gone within months of each other, and these are not equivalent losses in the way they might appear from the outside. They are losses of entirely different kinds, hitting entirely different parts of her. Joffrey was her child. Her love for him was the most uncomplicated thing about her, fierce and blind and total in the way that only parental love can be. Losing him was losing the part of herself that she had poured most completely into another person. Tywin is something else entirely. Tywin was never warm, he was never kind. He treated Cersei for most of her life as an asset to be deployed rather than a person to be known. He dismissed her ideas, ignored her counsel, arranged her life without consulting her, and blamed her for failures that were the product of his own decisions. By any reasonable accounting, Tywin Lannister was not a good father to Cersei. And yet, he was her father. He was the person whose approval she had spent her entire life trying to earn. Every political instinct she had, every hunger for power, every refusal to accept the limitations the world placed on her, all of it was learned at Tywin's table. She became who she was by watching him, by absorbing his worldview, by internalizing his standards even when those standards were used against her. He shaped her more completely than anyone else in her life, and the shaping was painful, and she never stopped wanting him to see her as worthy of it. That approval never fully came, and now it never will. Tyrion has made sure of that. Tyrion, who took her mother. Tyrion, who Jamie chose over her. Tyrion, who has now taken her father too. And with him, the last possibility of ever being seen the way she always wanted to be seen. The losses stack. Each one takes something that cannot be replaced. And with each loss, the circle of people Cersei trusts, already small, already fragile, contracts a little further. After this season, that circle contains almost no one. Jamie has shown her he cannot be fully trusted. Tywin is gone. Joffrey is gone. What remains is Cersei, alone in a way she has never quite been before, in possession of a fury with nowhere left to go, and a crown that is about to become entirely her own. The loss of Tyrion's trial also deserves attention. Cersei has orchestrated the entire thing, pressured judges, manufactured testimony, used every lever available to her to ensure her brother dies. And even here, we can trace the roots back. Cersei is not doing this out of pure malice, though malice is part of it. She is doing it because Tyrion is, in her mind, the original wound. The death at the beginning of her story, before she had any story. She has never been able to separate that original grief from the person who embodies it in her mind. This is what unexamined grief does, carried long enough. It becomes indistinguishable from hatred. It becomes a reason to do things we would not otherwise do. Cersei has never examined her feelings about her mother's death, about Tyrion's role in it, about the years of living in a family structured by Tywin's contempt and distance. She has carried it all, unprocessed, and it has made her more capable of cruelty than she might otherwise have been. With both Joffrey and Tywin gone, something shifts in Cersei. The losses stack, the armour gets thicker, the circle of people she trusts, already small, contracts further. Season 5 gives Cersei something she has spent her entire life wanting, real power. Tommen is king, but Tommen is sweet and easily led, and without Tywin or Joffrey above her, Cersei is the person who shapes the small council, manages the realm and makes the decisions. For the first time in her life, she is effectively running the kingdom. And it is worth pausing on what that actually means for her. Because this is not a small thing. This is the thing she has been reaching toward her entire life. Through the suffocation of her marriage, through the years of being sidelined by her father, through the humiliation of watching men with half her intelligence make decisions she could see were wrong. She has wanted this. She has earned this, in her own mind at least. And now it is hers. The question the season asks, quietly and then very loudly, is what happens when someone who has spent their whole life fighting for power finally gets it, and discovers that the getting of it does not heal the wounds that drove the wanting. Cersei does not become calmer when she takes control of the small council. She does not become more measured, or more generous, or more far-sighted. If anything, she becomes more reactive, more suspicious, more driven by the emotional need she has never learned to separate from her political decisions. And the emotional need that dominates this season, above all others, is Tommen. He is her last child at court. After Joffrey's death, after Myrcella sent away to Dorne, Tommen is what she is left within reach, and Tommen is being taken from her, not violently, not obviously, but steadily and with great skill, by Margaery Tyrell. We talked about Margaery in Season 4, about the specific quality of Cersei's feelings toward her, but in Season 5 those feelings sharpen into something more urgent, because Margaery is not just a rival now. She's Tommen's wife. She's in his bed, in his ear, in his affections, and Cersei can feel her son drifting, can feel the quiet reorientation happening, the way Tommen looks at his wife with an openness and a trust that he used to reserve for his mother. It is a specific kind of loss, watching your child choose someone else as their primary person, and for Cersei, who has so little left, it is intolerable. She's not navigating this alone, at least. Two figures stay close to her throughout this season in ways that matter. The first is Qyburn, a disgraced former Maester, brilliant and unsettling, who has attached himself to Cersei's cause with a quiet devotion that she finds useful and does not examine too closely. Qyburn is the kind of man who does not ask moral questions. He simply solves problems. And Cersei, at this point in her life, has very little patience left for moral questions herself. He whispers in her ear, manages things she would rather not manage directly, and asks nothing of her except her continued favour. He is, in his way, the perfect advisor for the woman she is becoming. The second figure is the Mountain, or rather, what used to be the Mountain. Gregor Clegane, the enormous brutal knight who served House Lannister, was mortally wounded in a trial by combat earlier in the season. Qyburn took him, experimented on him, and produced something that wears the Mountain's body but operates with a terrifying, silent obedience that the original man never had. He stands behind Cersei like a wall. He does not speak. He does not need to. His presence is the message. Whatever you're thinking of doing to her, consider what is standing behind her first. There is something revealing about the fact that this is the alliance Cersei builds when she finally has power. Not a network of trusted friends, not a circle of genuine loyalty, but a disgraced scientist who asks no questions and a reanimated weapon who cannot. She has reached a point where genuine human connection feels too risky, too unreliable. She trusts the man who owes her everything and the creature who cannot choose otherwise. It is a kind of safety. It is also a kind of profound isolation. So she makes a catastrophic mistake. The High Sparrow has arrived in King's Landing. He leads a religious movement, the Faith Militant, that has been growing in power, drawing support from the poor and disenfranchised, people who are angry at the corruption and excess of the nobility. He is a slight, soft-spoken man who wears plain robes and speaks in the language of humility and righteousness. He seems, on the surface, like someone Cersei could manage, someone she could use. Cersei, seeing an opportunity to weaken the Tyrells, who are her rivals for influence over Tommen, decides to arm and legitimize the Faith Militant. She reinstates an ancient office, the High Septon's power to judge and punish even noble citizens in the name of the gods. She hands a man she has underestimated a weapon she does not fully understand, because she's too focused on the immediate target to think about where the weapon might eventually point. This is one of the clearest demonstrations in the whole series of how Cersei's emotional needs can undermine her intelligence. She is smart. She has always been smart. But when something threatens the people she loves, or the position she has fought so hard to occupy, her thinking narrows. She stops seeing the full board. She sees the threat directly in front of her, and she moves against it, and she does not fully account for what she is setting in motion. And so, Margaery is arrested. Cersei visits her in the cells with barely concealed satisfaction, bringing a plate of food and wearing a smile that does not reach her eyes. It is one of the pettier moments in her arc, and the show lets it be petty. Cersei at her worst is not always grand and operatic. Sometimes she is simply someone enjoying a rival's humiliation a little too visibly. And then the High Sparrow turns the weapon around. Cersei herself is arrested, charged with adultery, incest, and the murder of King Robert. The trap she set for the Tyrells has closed around her instead. She's taken to a cell beneath the sept, and the door is locked, and the woman who was running the kingdom this morning is now a prisoner. She is held in that cell for weeks. The cell is cold and dark, and the food is poor and the water is limited. For a woman who has lived in palaces her entire life, who has used physical luxury as a kind of armour against the world, the silk, the wine, the fires, the deference. This deprivation is a systematic dismantling of the self she has constructed, every layer stripped away, every defence removed. She refuses to confess for as long as she can, because confessing is not just a legal act for Cersei, it is a surrender. It is an acknowledgement that someone else has power over her. She has spent decades refusing exactly that. But the cell is very cold, and the weeks are very long, and eventually she breaks. She confesses, partially strategically, admitting to some of the lesser charges while denying the most damning ones. It is even in her breaking a kind of calculation, and getting out of the cell is what matters now. She is released on the condition that she perform a public penance, and so she walks. The Walk of Atonement is one of the most discussed sequences in Game of Thrones. Cersei, naked, her hair shorn, walks through the streets of King's Landing while a sceptre rings a bell behind her and chants the word shame. The crowds gather. They throw things. They shout things. It is degradation engineered to be total. Lena Headey, who plays Cersei throughout the series, does something extraordinary in this sequence. She does not weep or flinch or look away. Instead, she keeps Cersei's face composed, her eyes forward, her pace steady. She is present in her body, absorbing every moment of it, and somewhere behind her eyes she is already deciding what comes next. The stillness of it is more devastating than any breakdown could have been. Because the walk does not break her, it clarifies her. By the time she reaches the end of it, she has been stripped of everything that was decorative, everything that was performance, everything that was borrowed from the role of queen rather than from the core of who she is. What remains is something harder and colder and more certain than what existed before. When she finally reaches the Red Keep, Qyburn drapes a cloak around her shoulders, and there, waiting for her, is the mountain. Silent, immovable, entirely hers. She looks at him for a long moment, and whatever she is feeling, the humiliation, the rage, the grief, gets folded away somewhere deep and internal. There will be time for all of that later. Right now she simply nods and lets herself be carried inside. She has been stripped of everything, and what remains has decided exactly what it is going to do next. But the season is not finished with her yet, because while Cersei has been imprisoned and walked through the streets, Jamie has been in Dorne. He went there for Myrcella, their daughter, the gentle one, the kind one, the child who was sent away years ago as a political arrangement, and who has been living in Dorne ever since. Jamie went to bring her home, and for a brief, quiet moment near the end of the season, it seems like something good might happen. Myrcella is alive. She is safe. She knows, somehow, about Jamie being her father, and she has accepted it with a grace that neither of her parents fully deserves. Jamie is bringing her home, The ship is sailing back to King's Landing. And then Myrcella collapses on the deck. She has been poisoned. A parting gift from Ilaria Sand, vengeance for the death of Oberyn Martell. She dies in Jamie's arms as the ship crosses the water. The third child the witch promised would be taken from her. Gone. Back in King's Landing, Cersei does not know any of this yet. She's recovering from the walk. She's planning. She's doing what she always does, converting pain into forward motion. And then word comes that Jamie's ship has been sighted returning to the harbour. And something shifts in her. Something rare. She goes to the shore to meet it, and for just a moment, just a brief, unguarded moment, there is something almost hopeful in her face. Jamie is coming back, and he is bringing Myrcella, her daughter, coming home. But Jamie is the only one standing. On a smaller boat approaching shore, a casket sits next to him. Cersei knows immediately who's inside. The witch had told her all those years ago in the woods outside Casterly Rock that her children would die before her, that she would see their faces covered in gold. She has carried that prophecy her entire life. She has watched it come true once with Joffrey, and now... Cersei stands on that dock and looks at her daughter's shroud, and something happens in her face that is very quiet and very final. What comes next will not be the actions of a woman who has something left to lose. Season 6 is the season where Cersei stops surviving and starts destroying. She begins the season still under the authority of the Faith Militant, awaiting a trial. Tommen is being quietly steered away from her by Margaery Tyrell, who has undergone an apparently sincere conversion to the faith and has the High Sparrow's trust. Cersei's hold on her son, always her most reliable source of both love and leverage, is slipping. And unlike the political threats she has navigated before, this one is happening inside her own home, inside her own family, and there is very little she can do about it directly without making things worse. She still has Qyburn. She still has the mountain, silent and immovable at her back. But the tools available to her feel increasingly limited. She cannot arrest the High Sparrow again. That ended badly the first time. She cannot turn Tommen against his wife by force. She cannot simply make Margaery disappear. And so she waits, and she watches, and she thinks. And thinking, for Cersei, has always eventually produced a plan. What makes this waiting period particularly suffocating is that news has been reaching King's Landing from across the Narrow Sea. Daenerys Targaryen, Daenerys, the last surviving heir of the dynasty that the Baratheons overthrew, has been building something, an army, allies, and dragons. 3 of them, grown now to a size that makes them weapons rather than curiosities. She has not sailed for Westeros yet, but the word is coming in pieces, through merchants and spies and whispers in the small council chamber, and the picture it assembles is not a comfortable one. A Targaryen with a legitimate claim to the Iron Throne that predates every Lannister and Baratheon arrangement is gathering her forces across the sea. She is coming. Perhaps not today, perhaps not this season, but she is coming. And Cersei, who's already fighting on every front available to her, files this away in the part of her mind that never stops calculating. One more threat, one more thing to survive. But the more immediate threat is the trial. Cersei and Loras Tyrell are both to be tried before a panel of septons in the Sept of Baelor, the great cathedral of King's Landing, the most sacred space in the city. The Faith Militant has been preparing for this for months. The High Sparrow is confident. Everyone expects Cersei to appear, to stand before the judges, to submit herself to whatever verdict is handed down. Cersei has other plans. Under the Sept of Baelor, planted carefully and quietly across many weeks, are caches of wildfire. The alchemical explosive, that eerie, unnatural green substance that burns through anything and cannot be extinguished with water, has been stored beneath the city for years, hidden there by the Mad King Aerys before his death, forgotten by most and rediscovered by Qyburn at Cersei's direction. It sits beneath the Sept like a secret the city has been keeping without knowing it, and Cersei has arranged for it to be lit. On the morning of the trial, she does not go. Instead, she stands at a window of the Red Keep, dressed in black armour for the first time. Not a gown, not silk, Not the clothing of a queen performing femininity for a court, but armour, hard and dark and deliberate. A glass of wine in her hand, the mountain at her back, Qyburn beside her, and she watches. There is something worth noting about that black armour. Cersei has spent her entire life operating within the visual language of queenship. The gowns, the jewels, the hair, the careful performance of a specific kind of femininity that the world expected from her. On this morning she has abandoned all of it. She's not dressed as a queen, she's dressed as something else, something that has decided it is done with the performance. The set explodes. The wildfire catches and spreads, and the building comes apart from the inside, a column of green fire rising over the city. Hundreds of people die. Marjorie Tyrell, one of the sharper and more genuinely decent people in King's Landing, dies. Loras dies. The High Sparrow, who walked through the city in plain robes speaking of humility, and used that humility as a weapon, dies. The entire leadership of the Faith Militant, the institution that arrested her, imprisoned her, walked her naked through the streets, gone. All of it, gone in a single morning, in a single decision. Cersei watches the green fire rise and her face is almost perfectly still. This is not the face of someone who is horrified by what they have done. It is not the face of someone who is triumphant either, exactly. It is the face of someone who made a calculation and is watching the calculation resolve. She decided this was necessary. She arranged for it to happen. It has happened. She takes a sip of wine. The wildfire is the moment many viewers identify as the point of no return for Cersei. And it is worth asking, honestly without flinching, whether there was ever a different version of this moment available to her. Whether there was a choice she could have made that did not involve burning hundreds of people alive. And the answer is probably yes, in the abstract. There were other moves available on the board. There were political options she had not exhausted. But those options required patience she no longer had, and trust in institutions that had already imprisoned and humiliated her, and a willingness to accept outcomes she could not control. And Cersei, by this point, has lost her capacity for that kind of acceptance. She's been backed into corners before and found her way out. This time she decided not to wait for a corner. She decided to remove the walls entirely. This is the saddest version of the nurture argument. Not that Cersei was made cruel by her circumstances, though her circumstances were cruel, but that she might have been something else, in a different life. A Cersei who was educated rather than ornamented, who was given legitimate power rather than having to steal it sideways, who was allowed to grieve her losses rather than converting them immediately into plans. That Cersei might not have needed the wildfire, might have found another way, but that Cersei was never allowed to exist, and the one who was allowed to exist is standing at a window watching a cathedral burn. Cersei is not the only one watching the scene unfold. Tommen also has the perfect view. He watches silently, knowing Marjorie was inside. It is too much for his tender heart. He feels responsible. He cannot bear it. He removes his crown. He sets it down carefully, deliberately, as though he is returning something that was never really his. And then he steps forward, and he falls. The scene is completely silent. There is no music. There is no dialogue. There is just a young man at a window, and then the window is empty. It is one of the most quietly devastating moments in the series precisely because of what is not there. No drama, no last words, just an absence where a person used to be. Tommen was the kindest of her children. He was gentle and earnest and genuinely good in a way that neither Joffrey nor Cersei herself ever quite managed. And he is the one she destroys most completely. Not with intention, not with cruelty, but with consequence. The wildfire she lit to protect her position, to destroy her enemies, to remove the people standing between her and power. That wildfire killed his wife, and the killing of his wife killed him. The chain of causation runs directly from her decision to his death, and she knows it, even if she will never say so. The third child, the last one, the prophecy, complete. She goes to look at his body. Her face, when she sees him, is the face of someone who has gone somewhere very far inside themselves and locked the door. She does not weep, at least not where anyone can see her. She orders him cremated and his ashes scattered on the ruins of the sept. It is the last thing she can give him. Proximity, even in death, to the faith he believed in and the wife he loved. Whether that is grief or guilt or both, we cannot say for certain. Perhaps she cannot either. And then she goes to the throne room. The lords and ladies of the court are assembled. Qyburn steps forward, and Cersei Lannister, who was born a daughter to be sold, who was made a wife to be managed, who was used as a political instrument by her father and ignored by her husband and imprisoned by a man in plain robes, is crowned Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, first of her name. She sits on the Iron Throne, the throne that has cut the hands of the unworthy, that was built from the swords of 1,000 defeated enemies, that every man in her life told her she would never sit on. She sits on it, and she looks out at the room, and the room looks back at her. She got what she always wanted. She's the most powerful person in the world. And she has nothing left to protect. This is the moment the nature-nurture question becomes almost impossible to untangle. Because whoever Cersei was at the beginning, whatever combination of inborn traits and early experiences first shaped her, she has travelled so far from that starting point that the origin almost doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what she is now. A woman with absolute power, no surviving children, no husband, no father, no genuine allies, and a grief so total and so long unprocessed that it has calcified into something that no longer resembles grief at all. That is a specific and very dangerous thing to be, and across the narrow sea Daenerys Targaryen is loading her ships. Season 7 is the penultimate season, and it finds Cersei fully in her element in one way, and completely outside it in another. She is queen, she's unchallenged within King's Landing, she has survived everything, and the world is about to become much stranger than anything she has ever prepared herself for. The season quickly establishes the threats converging on her. Daenerys Targaryen has arrived from across the narrow sea with an army, 3 dragons, and a claim to the throne that predates any Baratheon or Lannister arrangement. Jon Snow, king in the north, is asking all the great houses to set aside their conflicts and face a threat from beyond the wall, an army of the dead, led by a figure called the Night King, advancing south through the ice, and somewhere in between those two threats Cersei sits on the Iron Throne and tries to decide which problem to address first. Her response to Daenerys is strategic and recognisable. She begins forming new alliances. The most significant is with Euron Greyjoy, the new ruler of the Iron Islands, a man who is chaotic and violent and performing a kind of gleeful menace that even Cersei finds difficult to fully read. He arrives at court with 1,000 ships and an appetite for power that he wears openly, and he wants Cersei. Not just as an alliance. He wants to marry her. He makes this clear in the most theatrical way possible. Cersei keeps him at a careful distance while taking everything he offers, the fleet, the loyalty, the spectacle of his presence, which sends its own message to anyone watching. She's not interested in Euron as a person. She's interested in what he brings, and this is something Season 7 makes quietly visible about who Cersei has become. She has reached a point where she does not really believe in genuine alliance anymore. She believes in transactions. People want things from her. She wants things from them. That is how the world works as far as she is concerned. Love for her is now a closed category. It belongs to Jamie, and to the child she is carrying. Because Cersei discovers this season that she is pregnant. A 4th child, after all 3 of her children are gone. And this lands in a way that is almost impossible to describe cleanly, because it is so many things at once. It is hope, which she has not allowed herself in a very long time. It is terror, because the prophecy said nothing about a 4th child, and she does not know what that means. Whether this one is exempt from what the witch foretold, or whether hope itself is the cruelest trick the future can play on her. It is purpose. Suddenly she is building something for someone again. Suddenly the kingdom has an heir to be shaped for, a future to be pointed toward. She tells Jamie. She does not tell Euron. That distinction matters. Even now, even after everything, after his freeing of Tyrion, after years of fracture and betrayal, and the slow erosion of what they were to each other, Jamie is still the person she tells first. He is still the person the news belongs to. Whatever they are now, they are still that. She spent 17 years married to a man who called her by another woman's name in the dark. 17 years beside a man who spent the kingdom's gold on tournaments and drinking, while she managed the political realities of court. 17 years in which the most public role available to her was to be beautiful and decorative, while the real decisions were made by her husband, her father, and eventually her sons. What does 17 years of that do to a person? It does not make you patient or gentle. It makes you exact. It makes you strategic. It makes you very good at finding the soft places in the people around you, because those are the only weapons you have been given. Cersei learned in 17 years of marriage everything the show eventually shows us: how to manage people through their desires and their fears, how to read a room, how to present one face while concealing another entirely, how to wait and to plan and to act when the moment came. Robert's court was her schooling, and she graduated from it with skills that were formidable and techniques that were ruthless, because ruthlessness was what the curriculum demanded. Her response to the threat from beyond the wall is something closer to dismissal. It sounds like exactly the kind of thing someone would invent to get her to stand down while they positioned themselves for an attack. An army of the dead, a night king, ice and magic, and ancient horror. It does not fit into the framework she uses to understand the world, and so she sets it aside. And then Jon Snow and his delegation bring a White to King's Landing. The meeting happens at the Dragon Pit, a great ruined amphitheatre on the outskirts of the city, chosen as neutral ground. And it is worth pausing on the specific strangeness of this gathering. Cersei, Daenerys, and Jon Snow, three people with armies and claims and completely incompatible visions of what the world should look like, in the same space, trying to negotiate. It is the closest the show ever gets to putting all of its major pieces on the same board at once. Cersei reads every person in that space with the precision she has been developing her entire life. She watches Daenerys arrive on Dragonback. She watches Jon Snow speak with the directness of someone who does not fully understand the value of concealment. She watches her brother Tyrion, who she has not been in the same room with since he killed their father, standing across from her in service of her greatest rival. She takes all of it in, and she gives almost nothing back. And then the crate is opened. The White, the dead thing, the corpse that moves and screams and lunges, is released into the space between them, and for a moment the politics stop. Because whatever you believe about armies and alliances and who has the better claim to the throne, a dead man is running at you, and the dead man has to be stopped, and everything else becomes briefly irrelevant. Cersei is shaken. She does not show it fully, but it is there. This is real. Whatever she thought about the threat from beyond the wall, trick, exaggeration, political theatre, this is not that. This is a dead thing that moves and will not stop until it is destroyed, and there are apparently hundreds of thousands of them marching south. She agrees to the truce. She agrees to pull her forces back and allow the living to face the dead together. She says the words. She means none of them. But before the gathering ends, something else happens. Tyrion goes to speak with her alone. This conversation happens off-screen. We do not see what is said between them. What we see is the before and the after. Tyrion going in, Tyrion coming out, and then Cersei returning to the gathering and announcing that she will commit Lannister forces to the fight against the dead. It appears, from the outside, that Tyrion said something that moved her, that the brother she has despised and tried to destroy reached her in some way that the White, and the evidence, and Jon Snow's plain speaking could not. Jamie believes it. He has always wanted to believe that somewhere underneath everything Cersei is reachable, that the person he has loved his entire life retains some capacity for the kind of choice that does not require a personal advantage attached to it. He begins making preparations. He starts planning the logistics of marching north. He is for a brief moment the Cersei that everyone hoped was still in there somewhere. And then she tells him the truth. There are no Lannister armies going north. There never were. Whatever Tyrion said to her, whatever she appeared to agree to in that gathering, it was a performance. She intends to let Daenerys and Jon Snow and the Night King exhaust each other, and then, when whoever survives is weakened and depleted, she will be here, with her forces intact, with the Golden Company arriving from across the sea, ready to take back whatever is left. It is a long game. It is always a long game. Jamie stares at her. He has known Cersei his entire life. He has loved her his entire life. He has excused things, explained things, looked away from things, told himself stories about things. He stood by while she did things he knew were wrong, because the love was stronger than the objection, or because he told himself the objection didn't quite reach the threshold that would require him to act. He has been, for most of his life, Cersei's most loyal enabler, the person whose presence made her feel justified, whose love made her feel seen, whose silence made her feel permitted. But this is different. This is not political ruthlessness. This is not even the kind of cruelty he has watched her deploy against enemies. This is a decision to let the world end, to let an army of the dead roll over the living, because the survivors might be easier to defeat. This is a calculation that treats the existence of humanity as a variable to be managed. And Jamie, who's been moving slowly towards something like conscience for several seasons now, cannot find a way to stand beside it. He tells her he is going north, alone if he has to. She threatens him. There is a moment where the mountain steps forward, and the implication is clear. She could have him stopped. She could have him killed, even. And Jamie looks at her, really looks at her, and then he turns and walks out into the snow that has begun to fall on King's Landing. The first snow anyone can remember. Winter, arriving at last. And Cersei lets him go. She does not call him back. She does not change her mind. She stands and watches the person who has been the fixed point of her entire emotional life ride away from her in the snow, and she does not move. Whether that stillness is pride or grief, or simply the final proof that she has passed some point of no return from which even love cannot call her back, we cannot say for certain. What we can say is that Season 7 ends with Cersei more isolated than she has ever been. Her children are gone. Her father is gone. Tyrion serves her enemy, and now Jamie, the last person she fully trusted, the last person who knew her completely and chose her anyway, has ridden north without her. She is queen. She is pregnant. She has the mountain and Qyburn and Euron's fleet and the promise of the Golden Company across the sea. And she has never been more alone in her life. Season 8 is a season that has been discussed and debated extensively and not always kindly. The show moved faster than many fans felt comfortable with, and the final arc of multiple characters, including Cersei, felt to some viewers like it was compressed in ways that robbed it of the development it needed. We can acknowledge that debate while still finding meaning in what the show gives us. Cersei spends most of Season 8 in the Red Keep, watching from above as everything changes. She receives the news that the Night King has been defeated, without her armies, without her participation. The threat she dismissed turned out to be real, and the people she refused to help dealt with it anyway. This does not seem to move her. She made her calculation. It resolved in her favour, at least for now. The living won. They are also exhausted, depleted, and still have to deal with her. She takes a sip of wine and waits. But the season opens with a significant shift in the balance of power, one that briefly, for a moment, makes Cersei's position look stronger than it has any right to be. Euron Greyjoy's fleet, armed with the great scorpion crossbows that are the only weapons capable of bringing down a dragon, ambushes Daenerys and her forces at sea, and they kill Rhaegal, one of her 3 dragons, shot out of the sky over the water. It is a devastating blow. Daenerys arrived in Westeros with 3 dragons, and now she has one. And Cersei has demonstrated that dragons can be killed. The weapon the world feared most has a weakness. That changes things. It also, in hindsight, makes what comes later feel almost inevitable, because a Daenerys with 3 dragons might have been cautious, might have held back. A Daenerys who has watched her children die, and she loves those dragons as children, make no mistake about that, is something else entirely. Cersei has lit a fuse. She does not fully understand what is on the other end of it. And then Cersei does something that removes any remaining ambiguity about where she stands. Missandei, Daenerys' closest companion, a woman who has been with her through everything, is captured. And Cersei has her brought to the walls of King's Landing, in front of Daenerys and Grey Worm and everyone watching, and she has her executed. It is a message delivered in the clearest possible language. This is what I will do. This is who I am. Come and face me if you dare. It is also, from a strategic standpoint, one of the most self-destructive things she has done, because Daenerys was already grieving, already furious, already being pulled toward the darker version of herself that her advisors had been warning her about. And Cersei reaches across the water and gives her a final unnecessary push. Whatever restraint Daenerys might have found, whatever capacity she had to take the city without burning it, Cersei has helped to burn it away before the battle even begins. This is Cersei's fatal miscalculation of the season. She has spent her entire life reading people, understanding what they want, what they fear, what they will do when pushed, and she misreads Daenerys completely. She treats her like a political opponent who can be intimidated, pressured, made to look weak in front of her allies. She does not fully account for the grief. She does not account for what a person becomes when they have lost enough. Perhaps because she has never fully accounted for it in herself. She has the Golden Company inside the walls. She has Euron's fleet in the water. She has positioned the civilians of King's Landing within the city walls, a deliberate human shield, because Daenerys cannot burn the city without burning her own would-be subjects, which would destroy the very claim she is fighting to establish. It is a cynical strategy. It is also, by the logic Cersei has lived by her entire life, a completely coherent one. You use the resources available to you. You make your opponent's victory as costly as possible. You survive. The battle, when it comes, does not go the way she planned. Daenerys and her remaining dragon, or Drogon, destroy Euron's fleet before it can fully engage. They destroy the Scorpions. They destroy the Golden Company. The gates are breached. The city's defenders, faced with a dragon overhead and Daenerys' armies at the walls, surrender. The bells ring out across King's Landing, the signal of surrender, the sound that is supposed to mean it is over, the fighting is done, the city has yielded. Daenerys does not accept it. What happens next is one of the most debated sequences in the entire series. Daenerys burns the city, not the walls, not the military targets, the city, the streets, the buildings, the people running through them. She becomes, in that moment, exactly what her enemies always feared she might become, and exactly what her supporters always insisted she would never be. The Mad Queen, her father's daughter, after all. Cersei watches this from a window of the Red Keep, and something happens in her face that we have not seen very often across 8 seasons. It is not defiance, it is not calculation, it is something closer to disbelief. She has always assumed she would find a way through. She has navigated every crisis, survived every loss, converted every defeat into a new position. The idea that there is no way through, that the game simply ends, not with her winning or losing, but with the board on fire, does not compute. Not at first. Qyburn is killed during the chaos, by the Mountain in one of the stranger and more abrupt moments of the episode, as the creature he created turns on him when he tries to give it orders. The Mountain himself faces the Hound, Sandor Clegane, his brother, who has been waiting his entire life for this confrontation, in the burning stairwell of the Red Keep. They fall together into the fire below, 2 brothers, 2 monsters made by the same violence ending each other in the middle of someone else's war. And Cersei is alone, truly alone for perhaps the first time in the series. No Qyburn whispering in her ear, no Mountain at her back, no army, no fleet, no strategy left to deploy, just a woman in a burning building and the rubble coming down around her. She tries to find a way out through the lower levels of the Red Keep, and in the tunnels beneath the city she encounters Euron Greyjoy, who has come ashore from the destroyed fleet, wounded and bleeding and still performing his particular brand of gleeful menace. He tells her Jamie is dead, or will be soon, that he fought Jamie on the shore and left him bleeding out. He is dying himself, almost certainly, but he does not seem to fully understand that, or perhaps he does not care. He has always been a man who valued the gesture over the outcome. He goes down feeling like he won. Whether that is tragedy or absurdity is difficult to say. And then Jamie finds her. He's wounded, badly. Euron's account was not entirely wrong. He has come through the collapsing city, through the tunnels to reach her. And here is the thing that the show has been building toward across 8 seasons, underneath all the politics and the wildfire and the betrayals and the prophecies. He came back. When everything was burning and there was nothing left to gain, and every rational calculation pointed away from her, and we came back. And all of it falls away. The armor, the composure, the decades of converting pain into plans and grief into action and love into leverage. All of it gone. What is left is just Cersei, frightened and exhausted and holding on to the person who has always been the fixed point of her life, asking him to help her find a way out. She weeps. She says she does not want to die, not as a declaration or a threat or a political statement, just as a true thing, said plainly, in the voice of someone who has run out of other voices to speak in. She does not want to die. And somewhere in that, unspoken, is the child she's been carrying through this season, that question she could never fully answer, that possibility she could never fully allow herself to believe in. Whatever the truth of it, she does not want to die, and she does not want to die alone. Jamie holds her. They try the tunnels. The tunnels have collapsed. They try another way. There is no other way. The Red Keep is coming down, stone by stone, the building that has been the centre of power in this world for generations, folding in on itself like it was always going to, like it was always just a matter of time. They die together, buried under the rubble of the world they helped to build and helped to destroy, holding each other in the dark. No last words that the audience can hear, no final dramatic speech. Just 2 people, at the end, in the same place they always return to, each other. It is a death that divides opinion, and has since the episode aired. Some viewers felt cheated, that a character of Cersei's magnitude deserved a more dramatic reckoning, a final confrontation, a moment where the accumulated weight of everything she had done was met with something equal in scale, that she deserved, in some sense, to be seen at the end, to be faced. Others felt that this was the most honest ending available to her, that a woman who spent her entire life trying to be untouchable, unreachable, armoured against the world, dying afraid and small and buried under rubble, holding the one person she never managed to stop loving, was not a diminishment of her story but the completion of it, that the rubble is the point, that all the wildfire and all the Iron Thrones and all the careful plans amount in the end to this, a person in the dark wanting to live not able to. There is no triumphant villainy in her death. There is no defiant final speech. There is only a woman, reduced to her most essential self, afraid and grieving, in the arms of the only person she ever truly let in. This is the Cersei who existed underneath everything else all along, the one who loved, who wanted to live, and wanted the people she loved to live, and who ran out of ways to make that happen. So we return to our question. Was Cersei Lannister born a villain, or was she made into one? The honest answer, as it almost always is when we ask this question about any person, real or imagined, is both, and neither completely. There are things in Cersei that seem innate, a capacity for love that burns at unusual intensity, a resilience that borders on the uncanny, an intelligence that could have taken her anywhere in a world that would let it, a certain ruthlessness, a willingness to make hard choices and live with them, that not everyone has in equal measure. But the direction those traits took, the specific shape of who she became, that was the work of her environment, a father who shaped her into a political instrument, a world that denied her the education and freedom given to her twin, a husband who did not love her, a position that gave her the name of power without most of its substance, and a prophecy told to her in childhood that told her all 3 of her children would die, and that proved correct. She was not born hating Tyrion. She learned to blame him. She was not born willing to burn hundreds of people alive. She arrived at that through decades of accumulation, loss upon loss, betrayal upon betrayal, the gradual conviction that the only person you can really trust is yourself, and the only thing worth protecting is what you love, by any means necessary. What makes Cersei compelling as a villain, and what makes calling her simply a villain feel insufficient, is that we can trace the path. We can see how each decision grew from the one before it. We can understand, if not excuse, why she became who she was. The understanding does not require us to forgive the wildfire, or Ned Stark's death, or Bran's fall, or any of the other harm she caused, but it requires us to sit with the discomfort of seeing a person fully. She's not a monster who looks like a person. She's a person who did monstrous things. The difference matters. It is worth noting before we close that Cersei is a villain in the show, in the sense that she causes great harm and makes choices that we are not meant to endorse, and does things that are morally indefensible. But she is never framed as simply evil in the way that some characters are. She is given interiority. She is given reasons. We are allowed, repeatedly, to understand why. The show does not ask us to sympathise with the wildfire. It does ask us to hold those harms alongside a recognition of the person who caused them. It does ask us to see how she arrived here, and that dual vision, you're seeing clearly and understanding fully, is harder and more honest than simply calling her a monster and moving on. Because the questions her story raises are not questions we can leave in the television. They're questions about how we construct the systems that people live inside and what those systems do to the people inside them, about whether we can hold someone accountable for choices they made inside a framework that denied them better options, about how love can become its own kind of violence when it has nowhere safe to go. Cersei Lannister did not have to become who she became, but she also could not have become someone very different, given who she was and where she started. And that is perhaps the most honest thing we can say about any human being, fictional or otherwise. And in the end, the thing that brought her down was the same thing that made her human throughout: love. Her love for her children drove her. Her love for Jamie defined her. Her inability to protect what she loved most was the wound that never closed. In her final moments, she was not the queen. She was not the strategist. She was not the lion of Casterly Rock. She was just someone who did not want to die, holding on to the person she loved. There are worse ways to end. There are worse things to be, at the end of everything, than someone who loved. Hear the quiet settling around you now. The story is complete. My hope is that you are now asleep. I appreciate you listening, and I wish you a good night and happy days ahead. Sleep well,